So the Ismailis are part of the Shi'i branch of Islam.
Yes.
Today they are scattered in some 30 countries or more,
Yes, 25, 30 countries, yes.
numbering 10 million.
Between 10 and 15.
And they're also assassins.
Dr Farhad Daftary is Director Emeritus of the Institute of Ismaili Studies and a member of its Board of Governors. He is the foremost authority in Ismaili studies and fundamentally reshaped the field through his own scholarship and by overseeing the publication of dozens of books from the IIS. He's currently editing the Encyclopedia of the Ismailis.
We have all sorts of stories and legends revolving around this business of assassination. Let me say a few points
Please do.
in connection with that. Much demanded and much, popular topic. That topic has been popular for 1,000 years now in various forms. It re-emerges, it disappears, and then it comes back in.
How does the Alamut period end?
Alamut period ended with a huge catastrophe, the Mongol invasion. But even the Mongols had a difficult time uprooting the Ismaili state. The fortress of Gertku, which was in one of the three territories of the Alamut state in Iran, remained in continuous Mongol siege for 17 years, from 1253 until 1270. Long after Alamut and the rest of the state had gone, this one, that would be a fantastic subject for a Hollywood film.
What does the Ismaili experience tell us about whether global faith communities need to have their own states?
It tells us that for a community to be vibrant and flourishing and prosperous, you don't need a state. Whatever benefits the Ismaili community today is enjoying is not because they have or they don't have a state. It's because they have enlightened leadership.
Welcome to Muslim Footprints, a deep dive into Muslim civilizations through the ages, accompanied by some of the best experts in their field. This is part 2 of our 2-part series on the Ismailis, from their origins to modern times.
The Alamut period. So as the Fatimid state was beginning to falter, the Nizari Ismailis were acquiring political prominence in these Seljuk dominions,
Yes.
Especially in Persia, where they had this state under Hasan bin Sabbah. What did this state look like, and how did it differ to the Fatimid state?
Yes. The state was quite different. It was a local, a regional, territorial state. It wasn't a flourishing major empire like the Fatimid state with all the trappings of an empire. This state came into being and functioned under very difficult set of circumstances, because as Shi'i Muslims, they were constantly under attack by the ardently Sunni Seljuks. Seljuks had come from central steppes of Asia. They were foreigners. Their rule was alien to the Persians, and Hasan actually capitalized on this resentment of the Iranians against the foreign rule, against the alien rule of the Seljuk. So in that sense, we can actually identify two dimensions or two sets of motives to Hasan's movement, which itself started as a revolutionary movement against the Seljuks. As you see, originally as an Ismaili da'i, because he could not tolerate the Sunni Seljuks, who had sworn to uproot the Shi'i Ismaili Fatimids. But as an Iranian, he also, in line with the sentiments of other Iranians, he was interested in reviving Persian nationalism, and this is why he adopted Persian language in preference to Arabic as the literary language of the community. Now, this was the first time in the Islamic world that a major Muslim community adopted Persian in preference to Arabic as almost the language of the community.
Okay, so you've told us about Hasan Sabbah, the first leader.
Yes. We are told that already in Hasan Sabbah's time, a son or grandson of Nizar had been brought secretly to Alamut, where he and his next two his successors live, again in a period of concealment. So we do not know much about the actual life of the Imams during the early Alamut period. So the first three rulers were dais, the next five were Imams.
Got it. And this whole period is, again, revolutionary. They've got the Seljuks, the Mongols, who were hostile. And so the Ismailis adopted assassination as an instrument, finding a way to bring in the assassins here.
We have all sorts of stories and legends revolving around this business of assassination. Let me say a few points.
Please do.
In connection with that. Much demanded and much, you see, popular topic. That topic has been popular for 1,000 years now in various forms. It re-emerges, it disappears, and then it comes back in a...
It's come back most recently because of these
yes.
video games.
No.
Gaming.
Yeah. Point number one, Hasan Sabbah did not invent the policy of assassination. Assassination existed within the Muslim world. Several earlier Shia groups, the Ghulat, the Mansuriyat, the Mughiriyah, and so on, the Kharijis, they used assassination as a tool. In the time of Hassan himself, the Seljuks used assassination. The Crusaders themselves used assassination. So assassination was not an invention of Hasan Sabbah. It was a policy used at various times for various reasons to removing political adversaries. Point number two, Hassan did resort to assassination as a method of survival, as a defensive, really, because Hassan was facing much superior military armies. He could not mobilize armies as strong as the ones mobilized by the Seljuks, for instance. So he intended to achieve the same results by removing the leader of the Seljuks in a region. It wasn't, you see, senseless murder of innocent people. In the entire length of Hassan's rule, 30-odd years, there were less than 40 cases of such assassinations. On the average, about one per year or 1.5 per year, because we have the list of the people. They kept the roll of the people who had been assassinated. It wasn't like, for instance, exploding a bomb that would kill tens or hundreds in one go. It was highly selective. So, by its very nature, that the policy of assassination as used by Hassan and some of his successors was part of their political strategy in reflection of their power position. But it was around this whole area that legends and the fables were brought about, because they did resort to highly targeted and selective assassination to remove highly prominent civil or military adversaries of the community who had threatened the existence of the community in specific localities. It was for that the bulk of the assassinations taking place, no matter what the sources may have been, in the central lands of Islam, were attributed to the daggers of the Nizari Ismaili Fedais, or self-sacrificing devotees who went on the actual missions. Anyway, it was because of these widespread rumors and so exaggerated rumors about the assassination that the Europeans, the Crusaders, who had come to the Holy Land for the liberation of Jerusalem and did achieve their main objective in 1099. It came to the attention of the Crusaders and their Western observers. Now, in their worldview, they could not understand and account for this type of behavior, self-sacrificing behavior. So they were looking for explanations to satisfy themselves, explanations that would explain behavior that otherwise would seem irrational or crazy to them.
Because these assassinations were highly dangerous.
Dangerous, and the perpetrators never, very rarely, if ever, survived. So they were prepared to sacrifice their lives. So it was to explain this behavior that the Europeans, began to fabricate these tales which we do not find in Muslim sources, even in the hostile Sunni sources of the period. Now, there is one linkage here. The linkage has to do with the word hashishi, and in the singular, hashishia, or hashishin in the plural. These were terms of abuse applied by non-Ismaili Muslims to the Ismailis. It was not used because they were using hashish. It was a term of abuse, meaning people of low social class or low morality. It was in that sense that the Crusaders picked up the word, and it was the term, together with the exaggerated reports about the Ismaili Fedais, that combination provided the context in which they began to fabricate the tales. The tales, the legends, actually evolved over time. At each stage, further embellishments were added to the tales. You start by the recruitment tale, and the garden tale, the hashish tale, the death leap tale, and finally Marco Polo, the famous Marco Polo, in his book of travels, gives us what may be regarded as a synthesis of all these tales, plus a major original new contribution of himself in terms of the secret garden of paradise, in which these Fedais supposedly received their training and their brainwashing and indoctrination. This garden was modeled on what the Quran more or less had to say about the paradise, with the houris and wine and milk and water and so on and so forth. So the would-be Fedais were given hashish or some other intoxicating potion, put to sleep, taken to this garden, and when they awoke, they found themselves in garden and partook of the bodily pleasures for a while. When they had become sufficiently addicted to these pleasures, not to hashish, but to enjoying the houris and the wine and so on, then the old man of the mountain, their mischievous leader, would give them some more of that portion, put them to sleep, take them out, and then when they came to, he would tell them, now, here's the knife, you go and kill so-and-so. If you come back, I will lead you back to the garden, and if you die, you will go to this garden anyway. And this is what motivated these Fedais to do what they did. This was the explanation that they were seeking, and because that explanation did not exist, this was tailored to their own fantasies. As we say, these tales are rooted in imaginative ignorance. They were ignorant of Islam when they came to the region, and they stayed there for 200 years, and their knowledge hardly improved by the time they were forced out slightly more than 200 years later. So they did not know Islam and its internal divisions. They know nothing about the Ismailis. In fact, they had no idea. It wasn't until the 19th century when they began to realize that these people whom they had been calling the assassins were a Shi'i Muslim community. They didn't even know that until, you see, until 1810, 1820, around that time.
And they certainly didn't know that hashashin didn't mean hashish.
Because you don't find that in Muslim sources. Then you don't find a single contemporary Muslim sources from Syria to say that these people were in some fashion addicted to hashish, or that hashish was given in some formal way to these people to motivate them to go on
Also,
these.
because if you give someone hashish, they would probably fall asleep
They want to go
rather
to
than
sleep.
assassinate
Yes.
people.
Because very often they had to stay alert for long periods to find the right, moment of time to carry out their mission. A real hashishi, in terms of having used hashish, wouldn't be up to the job.
Okay, so we've talked about Hasan bin Sabbah. There was another key figure, this old man of the mountain.
Yes, yeah.
Rashid-al Sinan.
Rashid-al Sinan was perhaps the most famous da'i of the Syrian Nizari Ismailis. He was, like other da'is of the Syrian Nizaris, was actually dispatched from Alamut and became the head of the community there from around 1164, 65, for about 30 years until he died in 1193. This was an extremely difficult period in the life of the Syrian community of the Nizari Ismailis, because they were under constant attack by the Zangis, the Ayyubis, because at the time Salah ad-Din, who had just uprooted the Fatimids. By the way, strangely enough, he was the last of the Fatimid Wazirs, but as I said, the Wazirs rather than the caliphs by that time were the actual rulers. So he managed to bring down the Fatimid after a few years of himself serving as the Wazir in 1171. The Zangids, the Ayyubids, and the Crusaders who had arrived on the scene. Now, Rashid-al Sinan was a strategist, like Hasan bin Sabbah, was a first-rate strategist. He developed he had a strategy that changed over time, reflecting constantly changing circumstances, and he entered into a shifting and changing network of alliances. He would ally himself, let's say, first with Zangids when the Ayyubis posed more of a threat, and then he would change. Constantly, he was constantly changing sides with these three, the Crusaders. Sometimes he sided with the Crusaders against Ayyubids, Zangids, and the Crusaders. And he managed to navigate himself among these three surrounding powers, always keeping in mind the safety and independence of the Syrian Nizari community. And he succeeded. So he's managed to take the community to the peak of their power and fame. And it was during his time that these so-called assassin legends began to appear. And he's the one who, in the Western sources for the first time, was called the Old Man of the Mountain.
He was in Syria or in Alamut?
In Syria. He had spent some time, he came from Iraq. Like many of these da'is, they were natives of different parts of southern Iraq. But he had gone to Alamut. He was a close friend of Hasan al-Zakr salam, the fourth lord of Alamut and the first imam to emerge. He had been there for a few years to further his education. And then he was sent by the imam of the time, Hasan, to Syria to lead the community there.
So in total, the Alamut period was led by 3 da'is and 5 imams.
Yes.
They don't produce much substantial literature.
They couldn't. They were constantly struggling for their survival. But towards the end, they did produce major sort of works, mostly through the efforts of Tusi, who's the Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, who was originally a 12er Shi'i, like many other Muslim and non-Muslim scholars, when the Mongol invasion started from Central Asia, and these scholars were running away from the Mongols, they found refuge in the Ismaili castles of Persia, especially in the region then known as Kohistan, which is today part of the southeastern province of Khorasan. They partook of the Nizari patronage of learning and their libraries. Now, Tusi was one of those scholars who, in his youth, in around 1227, was found himself as a guest of Nasir ad-Din, who was the Muhtasham, or the leader of the Nizaris of Khorasan, was a learned man in his own right. He spent some 30 years in the Nizari fortresses of Khorasan and then Alamut, during which he produced bulk of his writings, including his two major works on philosophical ethics, Akhlaq Nasiri and Akhlaq Muhtashami, both of them actually dedicated to his patron, Nasir ad-Din. And it was also during that period that Tusi willingly converted to Ismailism, as he himself explains in his spiritual autobiography, Sayr al-Suluk. Some 12 Shi'i biographers of him today hold that he was held there against his will. That was not the case, because the Ismailis were never interested in mass or in forced conversion. We do not find that, especially during the Alamut period of their history, as we have sort of evidence. So much so that not only he converted willingly to Ismailism, but he contributed to the development of Ismaili thought of his period during the final years, the final decades of the Alamut period. And he was really behind the production of what today we regard as the most important text that has come down to us from that period, the text known as Roze Taslim.
How does the Alamut period end?
Alamut period ended with a huge catastrophe, the Mongol invasion. But even the Mongols had a difficult time uprooting the Ismaili state. I mean, for instance, the fortress of Gerd Ku, which was in one of the three territories of the Fatimid, of the Alamut state in Iran, this fortress of Gerd Ku.
Because they had various fortresses around, right?
They had 3 plots of land in Iran. The state was comprised of 3 regions. The region of Deilaman in the north, in which Alamut was situated. The region of Kohistan in southeastern Khorasan, where again they had a large number of fortresses as well as towns. And the region of Qomes around the city of Dambeqan, in which they had this major fortress of Gerd Ku. Gerd Ku remained in continuous Mongol siege for 17 years, from 1253 until 1270. Long after Alamut and the rest of the state had gone, this one, that would be a fantastic subject for a Hollywood film. How did this garrison of Gerd Ku survive? A Mongol army of 5,000 people who had actually built permanent quarters for themselves. The remains
so
of
they were holed in. They were holed in.
Yes.
In this fort.
Finally, we are told that they were finally obliged to surrender because they ran out of clothing, and it was very cold, you see, up there. And then when they came down, they were all, you see, massacred by the Mongols, who had been waiting for them at the foot of that mountain for 17 years.
Modern scholarship has distinguished 3 main periods in the history of post-Alamut Nizari Ismailism. You write that the first 2 post-Alamut centuries are obscure.
Yes.
The imams go into hiding, they lose contact with their followers.
Disorganized, the community disorganized, recovering from a huge shock, all of that. It must have been awful because the Mongols massacred the Ismailis on a large scale. We are told that in one go in Khorasan, they gathered a large number of the Ismailis under false pretexts and put more than 10,000 of them to the sword.
Were there Ismailis anywhere else? Syria, for example?
You had in Syria, in Iran, and towards the end of the Alamut period, through the activities of the Da'is, going from Iran to the region of Badakhshan in Central Asia. So the Badakhshan had remained outside of Mustali and Nizari split until late Alamut period. When, as a result of the activities of the Nizari Da'is dispatched from Alamut, they joined the Nizari branch. Before that, for more than a century, they had remained more or less independent, following the teachings of Nasser Khosrow.
Okay, but mainly we're saying that many were massacred.
Many massacred. The size of the community must have reduced significantly.
Like half?
It's difficult to guess. At least, I would say, at least.
So the Ismailis that were left, how did they've got no strongholds, really. How do they...
They went underground. This was again another period of concealment. Not only for the imams, but for the communities, for the groups. They were already actually familiar with disguising, themselves. As I mentioned, even in the earlier centuries, outside of the Fatimid state, they were persecuted, and very often they were obliged to hide their true identity, what we call taqiyya, adopting different external guises. Now, during these 2 centuries, they went underground. The imams were in hiding. The community was, dispersed, in shock, disorganized, deprived of any type of central leadership. So different communities, different Nizari communities now develop their own local types of hereditary leadership that in time became hereditary. Sheikhs in Syria, peers in Central Asia, and so on. So they are disguising as Sunnis, disguising as Sufis. The coalescence between Nizari Ismailism and Persian Sufism starts and becomes very significant during these 2 centuries. And therefore, they were not in a position to produce any significant literature. We have only really the works of one major Nizari poet from that period, Nizari Qohistani, who has also left for us a safarname, or a travelogue, in which he insinuates, he more or less says that he succeeded in seeing the Imam of the time in one of his travels to the city of Tabriz in Azerbaijan, in northwestern Iran. So this was a very, very difficult period. There wasn't even much contact between different Nizari communities. So therefore, under the circumstances, each Nizari community developed its own literary tradition, its own customs and rituals, and so on.
And so is it this time when you can say that the Ismailis evolve into 3 different traditions?
It was in the first two centuries after the fall of Alamut. Had 4 traditions: the Syrian tradition, the Persian tradition, the Central Asian tradition. The main difference between the Central Asian and the Persian tradition, both based on Persian language, is the Nasser Khosrow tradition. Nasser Khosrow tradition is central in Central Asian tradition. Not so in the Persian tradition. In Persian tradition, there are other figures. But other than that, the two are more or less the same. They share the same literature. Then you have the Satpan tradition of the South Asians, 4 traditions. And then in the subsequent phase, the so-called Anjudan phase.
Right. So this is when this is the second phase, and this is when they re-emerge in this place called Anjudan.
Yes, the Imams re-emerge and establish their residence in the village of Anjudan, which still exists today. It's near Qom. In fact, the mausolea of some of the Imams are still in situ in the village of Anjudan, which is a small village today. They emerge there, but still pretending to be Sufi peers. In fact, the word peer enters the literature of the Nizari Ismailis during this period, and is applied to the person of the Imam as well as some higher dignitaries of the Dawah organization. The Imams re-emerged in the village of Anjudan to reassert their own leadership over these various outlying Nizari communities and to get rid of the hereditary dynasties of Pirs and Mirs and Babas, which had come into being. There was a big confusion, and also to actively start the conversion policies again after
This Dawa.
the Dawah is reactivated, and the Anjudan period lasts for roughly about two centuries until the end of the 17th century, and it's particularly is successful in both of its objectives. Those, especially in India, where the peers have become very powerful, the Imams managed to send their own agents after the early peers, and the Dawah becomes very successful in South Asia and in Central Asia, in these two regions. So the Nizari Ismaili tradition, known in India as Satpant, and the community known as Khojaz, goes back to the Anjudan. Bulk of it goes back to the Anjudan period and came about as a result of the success in the Dawah activities of the Anjudan period.
So you have the Anjudan period, and then you've got the modern period.
Yes.
And this is when the seat of the Nizari Ismaili Imamate in the 1840s moves from Persia to India.
Yes.
Why does it move from Persia to India?
Why does it move? Well, for reasons that to date remain ill understood, there was a rift between the Imam and the Qajar establishment. One set of reasons may have to do with the leadership of the mythologized Sufi order. The Grand Vizier of the Shah himself aspired to that position, whereas the Aga Khan, who was very close with Sufis, in fact, his mother was from a Sufi family, and many of those grand Sufi peers were very close to the Imam. Anyway, the Imam, he favored the candidacy of someone else. So this may be one of the reasons and then Muhammad Shah, the king, was under the influence of his vizier, Haj Mirza Aghasi. Very often in history, the rulers are influenced by the viziers and not the other way around. As a result of that, a conflict broke out. The two sides, in fact, started fighting for a couple of years, and finally the Qajars sent a very large army against the Aga Khan, and in fact the Aga Khan's chief commander was my ancestor, was
An influential vizier?
Sardar Abul Hassan Khan, who was his chief commander, and in 1841 they were obliged to leave Iran. They crossed the border to Afghanistan, and from there to Sindh and Gujarat, and then later Calcutta and back to Bombay in 1848. During all those years, the Imam hoped to return to Iran, to his.
And your ancestors went with him?
Well, he went with him, but then he was sent back to Iran and did some more fighting on behalf of the Imam in the region of Baluchistan. And he seized a region and ruled, waited for the Imam to come, who couldn't come. And finally, my ancestor stayed, in Iran, and hence he produced this line to which, my mother belonged. So in 1848, when the Imam had given up all hope to return to Iran, he decided to permanently settle in Bombay, or Mumbai, as some people prefer to call it today. And that really initiated, it was that coming and staying in Bombay, Mumbai, that really marks the initiation of modern period in Nizari Ismaili history, which of course continues up until now.
What were the Ismaili community's experiences in this 19th and 20th century?
Well, another, I would say, phenomenon which you did not refer to and I have not covered. I said that after the fall of Alamut, the Nizari Ismailis in many localities were obliged to disguise themselves under various external covers, Sufism, Sunnism. But when the Safavids came to power in Iran in 1501...
Yeah, we should say who these Safavids are.
Safavids.
This is the modern period. This is known as the start of the modern period of Iranian history.
Yes, Iranian nation really goes back to, they created what we know as, Iran. The Safavids were originally a Sufi tariqa, a Sufi order, like many other Sufi orders. So Shah Ismail, leader of the Sufi order, comes to power as the new king, founding the Safavid dynasty that ruled over Persia from 1501 until the Afghan invasions of 1722. So a long period. And from early on, they adopted 12 Shiism as the official religion of their state. And that provided new opportunities for the Ismailis and some other Shia groups to come into the open to some extent.
So they were accommodating of...
Yes, but now the Ismailis also chose, in addition to their Sufi cover, to pretend to be 12 Shiis. And in fact, some of the Imams or their relatives married into the Safavid royal family. In fact, when I visited Anjudan in 1975 or so, in a mosque in Anjudan, I found this epigraph issued by Shah Abbas the Great, perhaps the greatest of the Safavid monarchs, who transferred the Safavid capital to the city of Isfahan, which is a beautiful city. And if you ever happen to go to Iran, you should definitely visit Isfahan. He addresses the Imam of the time, whose name was Khalilullah, perhaps Khalilullah the First. He says, "You and your Isna Ashari followers are hereby exempted from paying certain taxes." And this was affixed to the wall of the mosque. They had been so successful in their taqiyya practices that even the Shah thought, or at least pretended to think, that they are 12 Shiis and not Ismailis. So now this taqiyya tactic, is a two-edged sword. In the short run, it saves the taqiyya practicing individual or family from persecution. In long run, it leads to the loss of original religious identity, because they do become absorbed. They get assimilated into the dominant community, which had been chosen as a cover initially. This is what happened to Iran. In 19th century, the Ismailis in Iran were practicing together with the 12 Rashis, which means they had the same rituals, observing the Muharram for Imam Hussein and so on and so forth. So when the Imam goes to India and is received by the Khojas there, who swarm in large numbers to his side, it's the first time that the Imam is setting foot to India, that he tries, and his grandson, Sultan Muhammad Shah Khan III, builds upon that, but more extensively, to separate the identity of the Ismailis from the 12 Rashis. By doing what? By issuing the constitutions in which the basic religious beliefs of the community are articulated, so that the Ismailis know who they are.
How has the Ismaili community evolved in recent times, and what role does the imamate play in shaping that community's identity?
Okay, if we look at the trajectory of the community since the mid-19th century, when the Imam of the time, the first Aga Khan, went to India, just a bit under 200 years, we see a continuous effort on the part of the Imams to identify, to articulate the identity of the community. Now, this is very crucial, and then that identity, actually, a large extent, revolves around the identity of the hereditary Imam of the time for the community. The Imam defines the community. The Imam is the force behind the unity of the community, especially when you take account of the fact that different Nizari communities hail from different cultural backgrounds, with different languages and customs and so on. Now you have a practicing Nizari, Ismaili in Syria, then you have a Khoja in India, you have somebody on the top of the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan. From the first, appearances, they don't seem to have much in common. They cannot even communicate with each other than knowing who the Imam of the time is. Therefore, it's the existence, the very existence of the present and the living Imam of the time that functions as a cementing these different communities together, and sort of also introducing them to a common language, which is the language of following his guidance, following his teachings, and obeying the Imam of the time. So the community wouldn't be much without the person of the Imam.
Given all the gaps in the knowledge, how do Ismailis know that they're following an authentic line of Imams?
That's a very good question. Well, to a very large extent, they're following the tradition of the community. For instance, we know that the fourth Lord of Alamut, after several decades, specifically from 1095, when Nizar was murdered, until 1164. That's a period of how many years? 70 odd years. The community did not have a present Imam. The Imams were there, but in hiding. Then you have this fourth ruler of the state appears, and he's acknowledged as an Imam. Now, many people in medieval times claimed leadership and imamate, which was not accepted because they could not produce enough evidence. So this person must have produced something in his time to have convinced an entire, because you don't have any descent whatsoever from, in the sources that we have, mainly the three Persian historians by Jovaini, Kashani, and Rashid-al from that period, who are not, particularly, friendly towards the community. They would pick on that. They don't say that, well, this Imam claimed, this Hassan claimed to be the Imam, a portion of the community accepted, but some did not, and they split away. No mention of any split, any dissent. So that by itself, for me, is sufficient proof that we don't have today, because we know that even the texts that were produced during the period and were kept at the famous library in Alamut and elsewhere have not come down to us. They were burned or destroyed otherwise by Mongols or later on. And then after Hassan, we have genealogical evidence. For instance, for the entire Anjudan period of 200 years, we have the tombstones with dates and, and in fact, the discovery of these epigraphic monuments from the Anjudan period served as undeniable, irrefutable evidence to confirm the genealogy and the descent of the Imams over a very long period of time.
What does the Ismaili experience tell us about whether global faith communities need to have their own states?
It tells us that for a community to be vibrant and flourishing and prosperous, you don't need a state. You can be a transnational community, a global community. In fact, the world is moving more and more towards, globalism. I know there are those whose thinking, at least, is backwards, and they, like some of extremely conservative, authorities, they want to go back to the medieval times. But the Ismaili community, whatever benefits the Ismaili community today is enjoying, is not because they have or they don't have a state. It's because they have enlightened leadership. It's the leadership that counts.
You stood down as director of the Institute for Ismaili Studies, a year ago?
Yes, in January of 2023.
What have been some of the most memorable moments of your professional life?
I learned a lot as a result of my being here at the Institute. I hope my being here made a little bit of difference in terms of the programs that we are following, especially in terms of the research and publications that the Institute, because when I started, we hardly had any busy publications, we hardly had any faculty, and now, thank God, we have the largest faculty of Islamic studies department of any major institution in the West. Definitely in the UK. I mean, you go to Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, etc. They have 4, 5, or 6 scholars. We have more than 30 full-time, We have some 7, 8 series of publications. We produce even an encyclopedia. I'm right now working on an encyclopedia of the Ismailis, which by itself shows that the progress in the field has reached such a level that we can now produce an encyclopedia of the Ismailis. So all of this, of course, has been achieved, but I cannot claim credit for all of that. I was, fortunate to be fully supported by His Highness, in my work. And
have you had some good interactions?
Yes, we had. He was fully supportive of my work, better than anybody else. He understood the importance and the value of academic work and serious scholarship. Some of our colleagues were not so sure, and sometimes they raised the idea that, oh, these texts are too in Arabic, they're too difficult, the Jamaat cannot understand. He said, you have, in order to address the issues and to introduce the community and to even address the legends, you must let the record speak for itself, and the record.
Anything else that you would like to add?
No, I enjoyed our conversation. I want to thank you and your colleagues and wish you all the best in all your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Muslim Footprints is developed and produced by Kalima Communications in partnership with the Ismaili, the online platform for the global Ismaili community. This episode was filmed in London by Ali Reza Padania and Riaz Tinwala. And here's the team at the Ismaili who helped put it together. Amira Jiwani is the series producer. Azim Lakhani is the editor, with assistance from Suraya Mirali for subtitling. Rasul Daya and Aleem Karmali have reviewed content and helped with promotion on the Ismaili website. Layla Sharif is our social media strategist, who's managing the Muslim Footprints social media accounts. And Alia Mohammed is supporting with promoting the series externally. Shahid Karim, who oversees the team at the Ismaili, is executive producer for the show, along with me. We're grateful to our external reviewers, who are all members of the board of the Institute of Ismaili Studies. These include Dr. Nadia Ibu Jamal, who lectures on the history of Muslim societies, Ali Asani, who is the Albertson Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and Professor of Indo-Muslim and Islamic Religion and Cultures at Harvard University, Arif Jamal, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Law at the National University of Singapore, and Dr. Farid Panjwani, who is the Dean of the Institute for Educational Development at the Aga Khan University. Additional reviews were also provided by Dr. Alnur Danani, who specializes in the history of Islamic science, philosophy, and religious thought. And thank you all for watching. Be sure to follow our social media pages, where you can find additional content and keep up to date with our news. My name is Aisha Daya, and you've been watching Muslim Footprints.